Well, good morning. It's good to be here in the house of the Lord. It's good to open the Word of God and let it speak to us as a church, um, and to be convicted by the Comforter as to its meaning. Um, and we've been studying Paul's journeys for some time now. And we can see here this wonderful map provided by our technician um, that Paul's made a trip. He got to kind of the end there, and then worked his way back. And so um, there are common themes when Paul gets to a town, isn't there? And there has been the same themes every time. He would roll into town, and where would he go? If there was a synagogue, he went to the synagogue and did what? Tried to get money? Started preaching, didn't he? And he would continue to preach for how long? It varied, didn't it? Sometimes it would be a short stay because he would get run out of town. But what happened at every incident or every instance of him preaching the word of God? People believed, didn't they? Whether it was a small group, and even there were times that he was in a town, he preached, people believed, but he didn't start a church because there wasn't time. Wasn't time for that to happen. And he went back later and started a church, you know. So, but his theme, first and foremost, was not necessarily to start churches, it was to start getting people saved, wasn't it? To share the gospel with them. Because in some of these regions, they were very pagan. And so the concept of a one God, especially a loving, living God, was new to them, wasn't it? So sometimes when you're going to understand something that's big and complex, you have to take little bites of it, don't you? And in some instances, Paul just had to share Jesus with people. And then there are other times when with Priscilla and Aquila and Apollos, he did what? He shared the deeper meanings of the word with them, didn't he? So, and one of the great things about Paul. He never pigeonholed himself into doing just one thing. Well, I'm just an evangelist. Well, I'm just starting churches. Well, I'm just this or I'm just that. No, he did what? He did whatever the situation called for. Now, that is a great message for us, isn't it? Because sometimes the situation at work calls for somebody needing to hear something positive. They need to hear that there is hope in this terrible world. And that may be all they're ready for, right? But we have that, don't we? We can tell them where that hope lies, where that peace. And I've thought about the word peace a lot this week. The peace, because Jesus said many times, peace be with you. That is something that he gives, and he wants us to desire a peaceful life. Doesn't mean it's always going to be peaceful. Doesn't mean that it's going to be easy, right? But where does that peace come from? From the Lord. It doesn't come from how much money's in our bank. It doesn't come from our job. Does it even come from friends? Does it? It has to start here. And that was the great thing about getting to share love with Berkeley yesterday, is it all generates from the word of God. Mankind has love so messed up, but still the basis for love comes from where? It comes from God. And I explained to her, we went to Corinthians where it talks about the characteristics of love, that it's not jealous and envious and all those things. And if somebody is saying that they love you, but the fruits of that love are not good works, then guess what? It's not love from God, is it? So Paul wanted to share the true meaning of the gospel with all of these people. So today we will start in chapter 20 of Acts. And what had just happened in the previous sermon? There was a great uproar, a riot, because Paul was doing what? He was causing the goldsmiths and the silversmiths and the people that made idols, costing them money, and they wanted to kill him. And God stepped in and intervened with a local what was he called, town clerk, who just looked at it from a rational standpoint. Listen, they haven't broken any of our laws, physical laws, so they haven't tore down your temple of Diana. So we have no reason other than you don't like what they're preaching to punish them. And so it was calmed down. So in verse 20, we're starting right after that. And after the uproar was ceased, Paul called unto him the disciples and embraced them and departed for to go unto Macedonia. So this is immediately after that. What did Paul want to do? He wanted to get everybody together to know that everybody was okay after going through that. I think that they were glad to be alive. Now, their faith, the apostles, the disciples in this story here, knew that their everlasting life was based in Jesus, okay? But they were still glad to be alive, weren't they? And we have that indwelled in us, that self-preservation. So Paul was glad. They were glad to be alive. And he wanted to kind of make contact with everybody before they headed off to Macedonia. And when he had gone over those parts, so talking about all the elements that they had gone through, um, and had given them such exhortation, he came unto Greek. So Paul wanted, before he left, he wanted to do what to that group of people? Lift them up. Yes, he wanted to lift them up and try to make sure that they weren't beat down by that horrific incident, right? And there abode 3 months. And when the Jews laid wait for him, as he was about to sail unto Syria, he supposed to return through Macedonia. So so Paul laid up there for 3 months, and it's they thought that when he was there in Greece during this time that's when he wrote the book of Romans. So Paul was never, even when he was idle, he wasn't idle, was he? Even when he wasn't traveling, Paul was always writing down the wonders of the word. Isn't that great? So we can see that when we go through this week, we say, okay, I need to spend an hour and 36 minutes preaching to somebody. And then that's all I'm required to do. Paul didn't do that, did he? When he wasn't preaching, what was he doing? He was writing about the inspired word of God. So even when we don't have somebody to witness to about salvation, about the church, we can do what? We can pray, we can read, we can meditate, we can get our phone and get that app and turn the word of God on and let it play. I love doing that in my office at work. Just hit play and let the British guy read the word of God to me. That's really good. So, but who was laying in wait for him? Those pesky Jews. Did he live in their head continually? He did. Apparently, they thought more about, where's Paul? What's he doing? Is he causing us money? Is he getting into our business? So much that they had a hard time remembering what they were wanted to do. So in verse 4, and there accompanied him to Asia, Sopar of um, Berea, and of the Thessalonians, and the Archus, and the Seducus, and Gaius of Derbe, and Timothy of Asia, and Tyrus of Thenopolis. Okay. I know I didn't even come close to getting some of those right. But you know I'm not. But the point here is um, there are many reps right here at this conference, this gathering. There are representatives from the church at Galatia, from the church at Corinthians, and from other churches. And so they were having a gathering here. And there were reps from the Macedonian church. This is where we get the idea of a cooperative fellowship. That just because we are sovereign, independent churches doesn't mean we can't come together for a combined greater good. Right now, in Arkansas, I know out here we have fellowship meetings where we get together and do that, and then the annual meeting. In Arkansas, they also have they have missionary conferences, and that's where just a few churches in that region get together on Friday night and talk about things. But the point is it's important to fellowship with our sister churches, isn't it? So and verse 5, these going before tarried for us at Troas, and we sailed away from Philippi after the days of unleavened bread, and came unto them to Troas in 5 days, where we abode 7 days. So back on the road again, or the ship. Took 5 days to get to Troas, and then they spent 7 days when they were there. So you can see they were over here. They went through Philippi and back to Troas. They left Macedonia, the churches in that region, and they're heading back toward Jerusalem, weren't they, eventually? So, and this is really important. Verse 7, because I've had this conversation with people many times. And we'll talk about that after we read the verse. And upon the first day of the week, when the disciples came together to break bread, Paul preached unto them, ready to depart on the morrow, and continued his speech until midnight. What's important about that verse? Well, there's multiple things, but there's one key point. When did they come together? On the first day of the week. This is considered one of the first ideas that the worshiping on the Sabbath was shifted to worshiping on the first day of the week. So when people ask you, well, why don't you worship on the Sabbath like you did in the Old Testament? Well, things had been shifted. The gospel had been shifted. They wanted to come together on the first day of the week. Now, really, are there days of the week we're not supposed to worship God? Are there days of the week that are saying, okay, we can't have church that day, you know? Oh, that day is blocked out for preaching. It's a non-preaching day. Absolutely not. We can worship every single day, can't we? We can hear sermons every single day, and quite often they used to do that back in the day, especially when there wasn't enough ministers to go around. When a traveling or circuit minister would come through a town, they would spend all day at church and 3 or 4 days in a row just going to church, because it may be a couple months again before a preacher come back through. So they seized the opportunity, didn't they? So we're not limited to the first day of the week. We have chosen to make that our day of worship. So, but Paul gets ready and he starts preaching. And it's going to be a doozy. It's going to be a long one. And in verse 8, and there were many lights in the upper chamber where they were gathered together. So they were at someone's house. It was full. They had the candles burning, and there sat in a window a certain young man named Euclus. No, Eu- Eutychus. Eutychus, being fallen into a sleep, a deep sleep, and as Paul was long preaching, he sunk down with sleep and fell from the third loft and was taken up dead. Now, this is going to sound bad, but when I read this verse, first thing I thought of is the boys when they were little, and we used to have morning service, and then we'd eat, and then we'd have afternoon service. Man, they'd be out, you know, especially one in the back row here. Uh, he would snore and all kinds of things. Anyway, so I can understand uh, how he got tired. It's hard to stay focused when somebody is lecturing uh, long. And he did what? He fell asleep, fell out of the window, and died. Now that's tragic. So they've here trying to do something good. Someone lost their life. Well, we'll stop there for the day. No, we're gonna we're gonna get a little further. But he died, and it was from the third loft, in giving us the indication that it was about a three-story building. So that was definitely a long drop, wasn't it? Um, and in verse 10, and Paul went down and fell on him and embraced him, said, trouble not yourself, for his life is in him. Okay, so he's not really dead. Okay, he's really dead. But Paul is minimizing this, isn't he? What's fixing to happen in the next verse. And when he therefore was come up again, he had broken bread and eaten and talked a long while, even until the break of day he departed. It was an all-nighter. But Paul said, don't worry, he's not really dead. But you think that he wanted to finish his sermon? I mean, I don't know how much time had elapsed here. But in verse 12, and they brought the young man alive and were not a little comforted. What do you mean? They were what? There was a lot. They're like, wait a minute, what did we just see? They're a little out of sorts. Okay, this kid just fell out of a three-story building. Paul went over, and we said, yeah, he's dead. And Paul went down, and all of a sudden, oh, he's alive. And the thing here is, Paul just brought this boy back to life, didn't he? And what did Paul do? He didn't draw attention to that. Now, why do you think he wouldn't want to make a big deal out of this miracle? It is. It is. And Paul did not want people to start saying, well, Paul just did what Jesus did. So, maybe we should be a follower of Paul, because we've already learned that there were people that were followers of John, right? So Paul was very, very, I think he was very astute that he downplayed this, because he still wants all attention on Jesus. And the power that he has is from Jesus. So this crowd of people were a little bothered. They're not really sure what they just saw. And in 13, and we went before to a ship and sailed unto Assos, there intending to take in Paul, for so had he appointed minding himself to go afoot. So when they landed at Athos, he wanted to go inland and on a journey that wasn't related to a boat. And when he met with us at Athos, Assos, we took him in and came to Mytilene. And we sailed thence and came the next day over against Chios. And the next day we arrived at Samos and tarried at, oh, whatever. And the next day they came to Mytilus. So they're traveling around, aren't they? From town to town. And why is Paul going to all these towns that I can't pronounce? He's shoring them up. He's encouraging them. He's preaching on all levels, preaching to those that are lost, preaching to those that are saved, preaching to those that are in the churches, right? He always covered all of his bases. He gave people what they needed to hear at what level they are. Like right now, you can't talk to somebody that you just saved. You can't take them and start a Bible study in Revelations, can you? You shouldn't. Yeah, you should somebody might. But why can't you do that? They're not ready for that, are they? And it's not because they're not smart. It's because they have so many foundational things they need to understand before they get to Revelation, correct? In verse 16, and for Paul had determined to sail to Ephesus because he would not spend the time in Asia, for he hastened, if he were possible for him, to be at Jerusalem the day of Pentecost. And from Mytilus he sent to Ephesus and called the elders of the church. So Paul did have a timeline. He wanted to try to be to Jerusalem for the day of Pentecost. But when he got to Ephesus, what did he do? And the Ephesus was a pretty good church at this time, wasn't it? They were well established. He called the elders together. And why do you think he called them together? Right back to that encouraging and lifting them up, giving reports, because when they shared missionary reports, they had to do them how? Word of mouth. Yeah. And we still do that today. When we go to the annual meeting, each missionary gets a little allotment of time to talk about their work. We still do that, even though we do have uh, social media and media outlets. And here, we can send a letter with a report on it. We have a lot other. But Paul is going to give the Ephesus church a report about his travels, isn't he? Because that's what he does. And we're going to end there today. So let's prepare for a closing song.